I'm going to be concluding the series, Only One Life. I've been talking about principles of generosity, and we've been talking about you, and we've been talking about your money. The reality is, people get offended when you talk about something so personal. But I want to suggest to you that your money and how you handle your money probably tells as much about your relationship with God as anything. And to me, this is just me, to me the most meaningful part of any worship service is offering time. That's me. I can raise my hands easily. That's not a huge sacrifice. You could do it too right now, I bet you. I can kneel, I can bow my head, I can say prayers. But when I give my money, it's a reflection of my whole week. And I'm taking my week, I'm taking my activity of the week, and I'm saying, Lord, I give you my week as an act of worship. It's the most meaningful act of worship for me in a church service. So this is Generosity Weekend, and in my spirit, I just got a great big yay going on inside of me. I'm delighted to be able to give and to give generously. Psalm chapter 90 and verse number 12. So teach us to number our days, that we may present to you a heart of wisdom. Teach us to number our days, that we may present to you a heart of wisdom. A pastor said that until you learn to number your days, you'll never be able to live wisely. Until you learn to number your days, you'll never be able to live wisely. Until you figure out, friends, that this is not all there is, until you figure out that you're leaving this world and you're passing on to meet the Lord, until you really get that in your heart and really get that in your spirit, you cannot live wisely. You can get to the end of your life and realize you got sidetracked. You can get to the end of your life and realize you've missed something that is really, really important. I think it was 15 years ago, maybe 13, could be 12. That Donna and I met our son Kyle in Victoria, where he was working in the Navy, and we took a weekend and we drove down to Seattle, crossed somewhere by ferry, and we were going down there to see a Seattle Mariners game. Went to the game, great afternoon. Found the cheapest hotel that was still not sketchy in the city, booked in, had air conditioning and 2 double beds. That's all we really needed. It was just about getting a night's sleep. Got up in the morning. I said to Donna and Kyle, go get in the truck. I'll catch up with you as I check out here. I checked out. I turned around when I was checking out, and there was a table about this size in front of me, and it had muffins on it. I grabbed 2 muffins. I went to the truck, chewing away on my muffin. I shared the other one with Donna and Kyle. And we got on the ferry. We're pulling out. The ferry had just pulled out. And Donna said, where's my camera? I said, I'll go get it. Got out of the truck, went to the back of the box, and I couldn't find her camera. And it suddenly struck me, I had left my luggage in the lobby for 2 muffins. I got to Victoria and I phoned the hotel and said, I could make this story longer, I'll save that part for another Sunday. I got to Victoria, I phoned the hotel, said I left my luggage there. They said, we'll send it to you, but send us $100 for shipping. So I sent them $100 for shipping. They have my $100 and I still don't have my luggage. I lost the lot because I got sidetracked over 2 muffins. I'd bought a beautiful shirt in Seattle in that suitcase I haven't seen because I got sidetracked by 2 muffins. Teach us to number our days so that when we get to the end, we don't realize we've been chasing muffins. When God has something much greater for us as Christians to be pursuing, we're laying up treasures in heaven, where neither moth nor rust doth corrupt. Thieves cannot break through and steal. Don't live down here for muffins. You hearing me? So a year ago, I began this journey of teaching some principles of generosity. And a year ago, May, we looked at 3 of them. We looked at the heart principle. Where your treasure is, there will your heart be. Where your treasure is, there will your heart be. The things we invest in are the things we begin to think about and pursue. The things we pour our money into, we end up having our heart there. If you want a heart that is after God, you need to be investing in the things of God. Where your treasure is, there your heart is. Second principle we looked at was the honor principle. Proverbs chapter 3, honor the Lord with your substance. The act of giving is an act of honoring God. Third principle we looked at is the humility principle. It takes humility to give generously to God. It takes humility to give generously to others. Why do I say it takes humility? Because every time you give something away and you give it to God, you're saying, God, I trust you with my finances. Everything you keep, you hold on to tightly yourself. You're saying, I trust myself to manage my finances better than I trust God. It takes humility to live generously. Fourth principle, we began this the beginning of May, was the heaven principle. Do not store up treasures here on earth, but store them up in heaven. And last weekend, we looked at the harvest principle. And this morning, I'm going to add the 6th and the last, the have principle. I think this principle is going to liberate you. It's going to set you free today. The have principle. I hope to, back to that slide, I hope to take these 6 principles and turn them into a book. This is something God has spoken to me so much about in my life. My challenge with writing the book, the first one is practical, finding time to do it. The second one is a spiritual heart issue. I'm afraid nobody would buy it. But I really do believe there's stuff in here that the body of Christ needs to hear. So today, the have principle. The have principle. Taking these principles out of the longest uninterrupted portion of Scripture that talks about giving in the whole Bible, 2 Corinthians 8 and 2 Corinthians 9. 2 Corinthians 8 and verse number 11. Let's look at it. Finish doing it as well, so that your readiness in desiring it may be matched by your completing it out of what you have. Out of what you have. The have principle. Now, to understand this portion, you have to understand the beginning of 1 Corinthians chapter 16. The church in Corinth had made a promise to give money to the Jerusalem church that was really struggling. The people there were poor. The people did not have enough to even eat. And they had said, yeah, we're going to give some money to help the church in Jerusalem. Now it's a couple of years later, and Paul's writing to the Corinthians and said, what's wrong with you guys? 2 years ago, you said you're going to give some money to the church in Jerusalem, and you haven't given it yet. You should complete this. Complete it out of what you have. Friends, somebody has said the pathway to hell is paved with good intentions. It's nice to have good intentions. It's nice to get around in your mind to think, yeah, I think someday I'm going to really get excited about giving. It's nice to have good intentions, but good intentions in the final analysis don't cut it. Paul says to the church in Corinth, complete your intentions out of what you have. There's a lesson here for us. Giving is not something that we should just expect from individual Christians. Churches, collections like the neighborhood church, communities of faith, believers together, should have in their very heart as churches a spirit of generosity. I'm saying yay in my heart today. This is Generosity Weekend. I'm saying yay in my heart because 7.5% of the offering today is going to Horizon College and Seminary. We're blessing another church, another ministry, another organization that is doing great things for Christ. We cannot just be about ourselves. 7.5% of what we're going to receive today, this weekend, is going towards a church plant in Regina that we're hoping to get started as the Pentecostal Assemblies of Canada in 2018. Churches that just worry about themselves never have the grace of God, never have the blessing of God upon them. If you want the blessing of God released, you need to be thinking about others. Collectively, we do as a church. Individually, it's our responsibility as well. The have principle. So Paul says to the Corinthians, the Macedonians have already given. How come you haven't? Give out of what you have. Give out of what you have. This whole portion in 2 Corinthians is really a lot of teaching about grace. In chapter 8 and verse 1, he talks about the grace of God resting upon the Macedonians. Chapter 8 in verse number 9, he refers us to the grace of our Lord Jesus Christ. Though he was rich, he became poor. It's a great example of the grace of Christ. Grace and generosity are words that are deeply related, deeply connected. Jesus became generous. He gave up his wealth and became poor so we could be wealthy. I don't know if we think about that enough. Jesus gave up a lot to come down here. He forever and ever and ever and ever and ever and ever, he lived in absolute wealth. The streets where he came from were paved with gold. The water he drank was absolutely crystal clear. There was not a drop of pollution in any of the water in heaven. There was no rape in heaven. There was no thievery going on in heaven. There were no unkind words in heaven. He lived in this wealthy environment of complete total health. And he gave out of that wealth, became poor. It's the grace of God. And then in verse number 7, we read, 2 Corinthians chapter 8, that as Christians, we're supposed to excel in everything. I hope you're excelling in your faith. I hope you believe God for whatever situation and circumstance you find yourself in today, that God will bring you through. I hope you're excelling in faith. Hope you're excelling in speech. I think we've got less and less careful in the church over the last 30 years about the words we use and how we speak. I hope you're excelling in speech, in knowledge. Are you in the book? Are you in the book? Are you excelling in earnestness? Are you pouring yourself into the things of God like you never have before? Or have you become less earnest? The things of God matter to you less and less all the time. Are you excelling in love? Does your spouse feel loved? Do your neighbors feel loved? Do your kids feel loved? Does the person you're sitting beside this morning feel loved? Are we excelling in love? But we're also supposed to excel in this act of grace also, and Paul is talking about giving. So you say, preacher, why are you driving me crazy by talking about money again? It's because I'm concerned that we excel in every part of our lives. And don't tell me money isn't a big part of your life. That's why most of us get up tomorrow morning and go to something called a job. Money's a big part of it. We got to excel in this act of grace also. So I think understanding the principle of what we have will go a long way in helping us excel. So we give out of what we have. So some of you are thinking right now, well, thank God I don't have to listen anymore because I don't have anything. The truth of the matter is there's nobody in North America who doesn't have a lot. Listen to these statistics from the USA Department of Agriculture 2015. So these are pre-Trump era statistics, so we know they're true. USA, they spend 6.4% of their income per person on food. In other words, they have over 93% of their money still available to them to spend on other things. It's in the United States. Canada, not quite as much, but we're still really up there in the nations of the world. 9.1% of our income goes to food. That means we have about 91% of our money to spend on other stuff. 9.1. New Zealand, we had a gal here from New Zealand last night at Saturday church. She wasn't too thrilled that USA and Canada was beating them on this statistic, but in New Zealand, 14.9% of their income goes to making sure there's food on their table, milk for their kids to drink. Russia, 28% goes on food. India, 30.5%, so 69.5% left to live on. Philippines, 41.9% of their income goes to making sure there's food. Kenya, it's 46.7%. In other words, they are spending almost half of their money just to make sure their kids have something to eat. Listen to this statistic from Nigeria. 56.4% of their money goes to putting food on their tables. Now I want you to go back to the top of the chart and you look at us in this nation. Friends, we have a lot in Canada. The poorest among us has a lot. And as I said last Sunday morning, none of us are in a position where we can't give a little more. And none of us are in a position where we can't live on a little less. We are a blessed nation. We are a blessed people. So you would think that the statistics would indicate, man, we're just getting more and more generous in North America. Unfortunately, not happening. 1920, Christians were giving away just under 4% of their income to their church. The lowest in the 20th century we got was right at the end of World War II, after the Great Depression, after World War II. It bottomed out at 1.5% of money was going to, Christians were giving to their church and to the Lord's work. 1960, it had begun to creep up. It was at 3%. Now, 2009, it's just over 2%. We've experienced a drop of 1% of giving over 50 years to the Lord's work among the saints of God, among the people of God. The trajectory is not in the right direction. It saddens my heart because it's a reflection of our priorities. God's work should matter to us. Every bit of money you have is God's money. And all you are is a steward of it. Let me repeat that. Every bit of money you have is God's money. Every last, I was going to say penny, we don't have pennies. Every last nickel you have is a gift from God. And you're a steward of it. And in stewarding God's money, God's plan for the money you have is much greater than your personal affluence. In this brief life, the brief mist of your existence, if all you've got at the end is a bunch of stuff, you're going to regret it. Right now, you may be able to impress people because you have a bigger house, or you got more degrees behind your name, or you got a bigger plaque on the door at the office than some other people. But understand that when the end comes, all of us go out on a box, and the box is almost always the same size as far as I can tell. All you can take with you is what you send ahead. Are you storing up treasures in heaven? So let's get back to 2 Corinthians 8. I'm getting sidetracked here. Can't afford to do that. Got too much to say. So what can we learn from 2 Corinthians chapter 8 about this have principle? The first thing we learn is you give yourself. You give yourself. Talking about the Macedonians in verse number 5, this is what Paul says. This, not as we expected, but they gave themselves first to the Lord and then by the will of God to us. You will never be able to give of your money until you have first given yourself to the Lord. When you're still living a self-centered life that is about you, yourself, and I, it's really hard to give money. But when you've given yourself to the Lord, then giving of money becomes a yay experience for us. So self-giving always comes before giving money. Self-giving always precedes monetary giving. Mom and Dad noticed that their 8-year-old daughter was becoming increasingly lethargic. And after a few days of her just losing energy and not wanting to get out of bed, they finally took her to a doctor. They took her to their doctor. Their doctor referred her to a doctor at Stanford University. She was diagnosed as having a very rare disease, and she was not expected to last very long. The only solution was a blood transfusion from her younger brother. Mom and Dad went to the doctor and said, "We can't ask our son to do that. Would you talk to our son for us?" So the doctor explained what needed to be done to the little 5-year-old and said, we need you to give your blood to your sister so your sister can live, and your mommy and your daddy want to know if you'd be willing to do that. And the little 5-year-old boy said, "Yes, I want to do that. I love my sister." So with that conversation, the parents approved the blood transfusion, and so the day of the transfusion came. They're in the operating room. They're laying on beds right beside each other. And the little 5-year-old boy sees the blood beginning to drain from his body, heading in the direction of his sister. And after watching this for 3 or 4 minutes, he's laying absolutely, completely still on the table. I don't know how you get a 5-year-old boy to lay still, but he's laying absolutely still on that table. He looks up at the doctor and says, "Is this when I die? Is this when I die?" He thought that in order for his sister to live, he had to die. And he was willing to do it. He was willing to do it. A lot of us really struggle with dying to me, myself, and I, and because we never die to feeling good and enjoying life and experiencing all kinds of things that we think will give us joy, we never learn to be generous. Generosity starts, number 1, in the have principle, is by giving yourself. Number 2, you give voluntarily. You give voluntarily. the end of the message, we're going to receive our generosity weekend offering. There will be no gun pointed at your head. I took the ushers away, the guns away from the ushers. This week only. You give voluntarily. Nobody forces you to give. 2 Corinthians 8, verse 3, they gave according to their means, as I can testify, and beyond their means of their own free will. Your giving has to come out of your own free will. It has to be something you believe in. It's something that you're doing joyfully and cheerfully. You want to do it willingly. Last weekend, I presented the $6 challenge. What was that based upon? When we looked at principles of generosity in 2016, the end of May, and then we tracked our giving through to the end of December here at the neighborhood church, our giving per person went up $6 per person per Sunday from June 1st through to the end of December. That's awesome. You say, $6, you're excited about that? Yeah, I am excited about that, because in a year that transfers to an increase in giving of $140,000 some dollars. That's a big chunk of money that we can do a lot of things with. Friends, I invite you to take the $6 challenge this year and say, effective next paycheck, I'm going to start giving $6 more than I have been giving. Don and I are committed to doing that. Now, we're in a position where we have the money to do it. You give out of what you have. But we're increasing our giving $6 per person per Sunday this payday. What's that mean? We're going to give $50 a month more. If we all do that, we can do so much more in North Saskatoon and beyond. We can do so much more in this province. We can do so much more to bless places like Horizon College and Seminary. We can send out more global workers, and the global workers we're supporting can be supported better. But none of us are forced to do it. You choose to do it voluntarily. Giving always has to be out of your own free will. Third point. You give proportionately. You give proportionately. 2 Corinthians chapter 8, verses 14 and 15. Your abundance at the present time should supply their needs, so that their abundance may supply your need, that there may be fairness. As it is written, whoever gathered much had nothing left over, and whoever gathered little had no lack. Pastor Shauna, so good to have you here. Come help me this morning, if you would. Our Christian education pastor, she says she felt the Lord calling her to Winnipeg. So we had no choice to bless her, but you served us well. So glad you've come to visit us. Charmony, come. Pastor Bob, come and give me a hand too. So, and ushers, in a moment, use an outside aisle to do this, but find an empty offering plate. But Pastor Bob, I just want to thank you for all the work you did around here this week, and there's your pay, and enjoy it, and don't spend it all in one place. And Pastor Shauna, just want to appreciate everything you do to make God's work go forward, and be blessed. And we value you around here so much. We want you to be blessed too. And you know our standard here is we just believe you should give 10% of it away. So just count your money there, and ushers, come forward and receive their offering this morning. Oh, it looks like it's already looked after, Tim. You got yours figured out, Pastor Bob?
I think so.
Okay, come give your. Thank you. Do you need help here?
Oh, yes. I'm horrible at math. Horrible.
10%. Okay. Good. So, You're generous. Okay. Now, here, come here. Wonderful usher. Thank you. Now, here is what Pastor Bob gave. Bit of a cheapskate.
Just do what I was told.
Yeah, you got to learn who to listen to. If you listen to people, you won't end up where you're supposed to be. All right. Listen to God's word. Listen to His heart, God's heart. And Charmony was quite a bit more generous. So bless you. But keep that for now. I should tell that back too. Good, because this is the Lord's money. What am I doing? And then we need more people like you in our church who are really terrible at math. Because this pastor from Winnipeg, everybody say Winnipeg. This pastor from Winnipeg gave $1,000 to the Lord's work this morning when she was supposed to give $200. So we need more people like you around here who have terrible math. Father, I pray. So here.
You want me to switch it out?
No, you can. It's all okay. But here's what you need to understand, friends: is this was the offering, and some point in the next day and a half, the offering ends up in the bank, and we use it for ministry. And our treasurer has a system where she writes down how much you gave, and at the end of the year, you get a receipt for how much you gave. That's what the church does. The church keeps track of how much you give. Do you know what God keeps track of? God keeps track of how much you keep for yourself. That's God's record system. And so here's the strange part of this. Even accidentally, Pastor Shauna became generous. Accidentally. But when God looks at it, here's the most generous person in the house. Because he doesn't have as much left in the end. That's how God keeps track of how we give. And I'll take all the money back. I don't ever really give. Bless you. Thank you. You may be seated. Give him a hand. Thank you. It's an amazing story in the Bible about a woman who was poor. One of the versions I read this week said she was the poorest of the poor. Another version I read said she was rock bottom poor. So here's this lady who's at the very bottom echelon of wealth in her community. She's in Jerusalem. And Jesus is at the temple, and they gave their offerings in the courts, the outer courts of the temple. If you were with us in Israel a couple of years ago, we're talking about the temple here, the outer courts. There's a woman's court, a man's court. Women are not allowed to go into the man's court. In the women's court, there's a thing called 13 trumpets. And they take their offering and they put the money in one of those 13 trumpets, things that just have a trumpet kind of looking at they would drop their coins in it, and the coins fall through to this central box where it goes clunk when it lands. And so if you give lots of money, everybody knows, because when it lands, it goes bum, 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 bum. This woman is the poorest of the poor, and all she has to give is 2 mites. They're tiny like our dimes. And she puts these 2 tiny dimes in the top of the trumpet, goes down to the center box, and you can't even hear it land. But Jesus says in Luke 21, verse 3, that she gave more than everybody. Because Luke 21 and verse 4 says, for they all out of their surplus put into the offering, but she out of her poverty put all that she had to live on. See, Jesus looks at things differently. Jesus doesn't pay attention to what you give. He pays attention to what you keep. And Jesus invites all of us to give out of what we have, and all of us have a lot. In the average North American church, and the neighborhood church statistics are basically this too. 20% of the people give 80% of the money. You say, doesn't that bother you, Pastor? Not at all. It's the way it should be. Because some of us are much better situated than others. We have a bigger surplus. And we should be carrying the majority of the load. Doesn't bother me at all that 20% give 80% of the income. Interesting part is that the next 40% give the remaining 20%. That doesn't bother me at all either, because we're all positioned differently. We're not all in a position where we can give the way some others can give. And God only asks us to give out of what we have. It's called the have principle. But do you know what really bothers me? Is there's 40% in almost every church in North America that give nothing. That bothers me because we all have. And God calls us to give out of what we have. Interesting verse. Do we have it, Dave? I guess we're going to find out. If not, I'm actually going to have to use my Bible. 2 Corinthians 8, verse 8. Let's look at it. Giving proves the sincerity of our love for God. Paul says, I say this not as a command, but to prove by the earnestness of others that your love also is genuine. Billy Graham said, if you tell me what you think about money, I'll tell you what you think about God. Our giving is a proof, an indicator, a sign of the sincerity of our love. Nobody needs to leave this church ever feeling like there's a gun on you at your head. Nobody ever needs to leave this church feeling pressured or manipulated. Your giving always needs to be voluntary. But you also need to understand that all of us have. All of us have. And we need to give out of what we have. It's called the have principle. We're going to receive your tithes and offerings, your generous, spirited giving this weekend, your radical giving. In just a moment or two, we're going to get the ushers to come forward one more time with offering envelopes. Who's in the outside aisle. And if you just need an offering envelope, you still haven't got one, and you want to give out of what you have, just raise your hand as the ushers come by your aisle today. I want to leave this quote with you. Don and I have prepared our giving, and we're going to give this morning. I want to leave this quote with you from Randy Alcorn as we conclude. Worship band coming along, please. The act of giving, listen in to Randy Alcorn here. The act of giving is a vivid reminder that our life is all about God, not about us. It says, I am not the point, God is the point. He does not exist for me, I exist for him. And so you're giving, not only this morning, but you're giving week after week after week. You're just saying, Lord, I realize that my life is about you. It's not about me. I realize that I am not the point of life. My affluence is not the point of my life. You are the point of my life, Lord. I do not exist for myself. I exist for you. So I just find great joy. It's offering time. Yay! Because we live for him. We live for him. And it's all about him. Thank you, thank you, thank you, thank you for your generosity week after week after week. This is an amazing church. But really, friends, we all need to understand the have principle. And we all need to learn to give out of what we have. We're all called to excel in giving. So I leave this last sentence with you. I leave this last sentence with you. When you learn to give voluntarily out of what you have, you're beginning to excel in giving. When you learn to give voluntarily out of what you have, you're beginning to excel in giving. One more time. When you learn to give voluntarily out of what you have, you are beginning to excel in giving. The have principle.